Hello, world. I'm Dan McCarthy,
I'm Brian Basaga.
and welcome to the Functional Fighters Podcast.
This is our podcast, which is a discussion on martial arts as it relates to self defense, practical applications, theory, history, and applicable in the modern world. We are always aimed at trying to make everyone a better martial artist.
Yeah, and today's topic is, from my perspective, this is a touchy subject. It's a real tough one because our topic today is I have a student who is a bully. In other words, the instructor, uh, instructor X, has someone in their class that is causing problems. They're a bully. That's very problematic because obviously in a self-defense school, you're trying to teach people to be capable of defending themselves against bullies. Um, so we don't want to encourage bullying. That's for certain. Um, and if you're going to a martial arts school to learn to defend yourself against a bully, and yet you have somebody in your classroom who's bullying you, then where can you be safe? So this is a very interesting topic.
Yeah, I think so. There's a couple of ways to be a bully, right? I mean, some people are and I think we need to touch on both of these. Some people are a bully in the classroom, which is definitely a problem, as you mentioned. And I think there are some people who take what you teach them and become bullies outside of the classroom, which is also a problem. So,
Yeah.
clearly, we need to have some tools to identify and deal with both of those situations.
Yeah, so I think something that's really important before we get too deep into the topic, and um, this is, like I said, bullying is a big deal to me. I was bullied as a kid. It's how I got involved in the martial arts. It was because of the fact that I was picked on in a very overwhelming way, and I finally just I couldn't take it anymore to do something, and so I begged my parents for martial arts lessons. So I can't even imagine what it would have been like as a kid had I gone to the. Actually, let me take that back. I had a teacher who was a bully. Now I think about it. I had a martial arts instructor when I first started martial arts who was a real jackass and, just didn't know how to treat somebody lower rank than them with dignity and respect. And I hated being in that instructor's class. Every other instructor, I was more than happy to train for and all that. I just couldn't understand what the heck that guy was doing teaching.
Mm.
um, and that's probably the worst case scenario when the martial arts instructor is a bully. Um, so what is a bully? Let's start with that. We got to figure out what bullying is, and I give a lot of school talks in terms of this subject, and the way that we tend to define bullying nowadays is to understand that bullying is a repeated behavior aimed at intentionally hurting other people. So there's a couple of things there that we got to touch on. Number one, it's repetitive in nature. Number two, it is intentional in nature, and both of those things kind of go together to make somebody a bully. Okay.
Yeah, I think
We
it's
could
fair to mention too that it isn't necessarily limited to physical
no.
activities either, right? You could certainly be, bullying someone on a psychological or emotional level as well.
In some ways, the physical is easier to deal with.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways it is. I think it's also easier for those around you to comprehend and provide aid with, right? I mean, like people generally see, like if somebody's getting beaten up, I mean, especially in a school like you're talking about, they can see that that's not fair and that that's not right, right?
Right.
And they can think about that and they can place themselves in that situation and realize they wouldn't like it, and it comes with more um, compassion or sympathy than like when someone says something that makes you feel bad because you
Right.
can't see that. I mean, sometimes you can. Like sometimes you could see someone say something to someone else and that person just melt or something, right? But
Yeah.
it's not as real to onlookers as physical violence.
Right. Um, So as I'm thinking about our topic here, I want to mention the current um, Netflix series Cobra Kai, because and I'm really enjoying this show a lot. I've grown up on the Karate Kid and have always loved the story of the Karate Kid. And there's a couple things to really think about. Now, from day one, uh, with the Karate Kid, first off, Daniel LaRusso has always been a little bit of a prick. And you got to accept that from day one. Daniel LaRusso, although he's the kid who gets bullied right from the get go, he's kind of a jerk in his own right. Okay, and that's how he's very much is portrayed by Ralph Macchio in the three Karate Kid movies before we ever even talk about modern day Cobra Kai. In the three movies, he's an okay kid, but he's not an angel. He's kind of a mouthy kid, and sometimes his mouth gets him in trouble, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes he's just picked on, and it's not his really any reason anything to have to do with him. Just like in the movie, he's the new kid. Whereas William Zabka, his character, Johnny Lawrence, he's in the movie, because he was really kind of the villain of the first Karate Kid. Although I would argue he's not the villain, and that John Kreese, the sensei, is the villain.
Yeah, certainly. And I think, the we just gotta, just something I want to touch on here is like, what you said about Ralph Macchio's character in original movies, certainly could be true, but we don't want to give anyone who's listening the impression that we're victim shaming here or anything like
No.
that, right? I mean, what you say has consequences, and how you carry yourself has consequences, but that doesn't give someone the right to bully you, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, 100%. Ralph's character of Daniel LaRusso is not like a white hat, perfect ray of sunshine kid, but yeah, that doesn't mean he deserves to have his butt handed to him every chance possible. Johnny Lawrence's character is not a perfect kid, but he's also not like a mustache twirling villain either.
super villain, yes.
He's not that. He's a kid who has his girlfriend break up with him, and he's heartbroken, and he sees this other kid chatting her up, and he's realizes he could kick this kid's butt, and he's got an anger problem, and he's been taught by his teacher that behavior is okay, because strike first, strike hard, no mercy. That's what he's been taught in karate. So in many ways, his teacher has created a bully. His teacher created a bully, and the sad part about it is that he did so in a manner that made it very hard to distinguish the positive elements of the martial arts from the negative elements, because he gave Johnny confidence and all this empowerment and all these things, which is why I brought up Cobra Kai, because Cobra Kai fleshes that out in a level that allows you to see that they take you back to before Johnny was in Cobra Kai, and they show you he was a skinny little geeky kid, and he joined Cobra Kai, and he gained all this confidence and self-empowerment, but his teacher took it too far and created a bully.
Yeah, I think that's a interesting thing, that as an instructor, obviously you need to be watching out for this behavior, both in the classroom and what you may think your students are doing outside of the classroom. But
Yeah.
when you identify it, that's one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, did I create this? Right?
Yeah.
It's something that I'm doing in the way I present my material or operate my class, creating this. Um, and there's if all of your students are like that, then clearly you need to, you need to take a look at what you're doing and how you're doing it and make some adjustments, right? Because you're kind of creating this, just like the old
Crease.
Cobra Kai instructor, yeah,
You,
Crease.
you don't only have a Johnny, you also have a Dutch, and you have a Tommy and a Bobby, and they're all bullies. Yeah.
Yes, exactly, right. And some of it can be intentional, which clearly in the grand script of the movie, it pretty much he was happy with the results that he was getting, right? But it could be unintentional too. I mean, I someone once put it to me. I can't remember where I heard this phrase, but there are always two things going on, right? There's the lesson that the teacher is teaching, and at that same moment, there is the lesson that the student is learning,
Hmm.
and they are not always the same thing, right?
True. Very true.
And I can just remember, I can even remember moments in my own training going like, okay, we're in this scenario, and this guy is attacking you this way, and this is a common thing they'll do, and here's how we're going to exploit it, right? And I can just remember thinking in my head, like going, okay, well, if I ever had to apply this to someone, if I ever had to be the bad guy, quote unquote, now I know how to do it right. So they can't do this to me, right? Or whatever, And some students really, they'll pick up on that, right? And they'll want to know, right? Or they'll come into class off the street because they want to know something, right? Like, I want to know how to, this guy just did whatever to me, and I want to know how to not, do that, or right, or I'm gonna,
Yeah.
this guy's bothering me, so I'm gonna go take some martial arts lessons, and I'm gonna give back to him what he's been given to me, right? And
That
those
was
are
me.
common ways. There you go.
That was me. That's literally how I got started.
Yeah.
You know, and what you said right there, it was really really valuable about what is the real lesson, because it wasn't very long before my own first teacher made it really clear to me that isn't what I actually wanted, because I was a good kid. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I'd had my own personal empowerment taken away from me so many times. I was in pain. I was hurting, and bullying as a behavior very often starts that way. It's you've been harmed on a psychological level. Um, and I say psychological because if it's only on a physical level, then it doesn't usually create a bully. It can be physical that damage you psychologically.
Right.
But if it's just you take a couple of lumps here and there and you're mentally tough enough not to let it get to you, then that's one thing. But a lot of times what happens is you get bullied long enough and it has a deteriorating effect on you. It has a real traumatic effect, and you are hurting so bad you want to visit that pain on somebody else. It's like transference, right? I'm feeling
Yeah.
this. I don't want it. I want to give it to somebody else so I don't have to feel that way. So you're hoping to regain some level of control and some level of power by asserting that over somebody else. And there's a fantastic study on dominance hierarchies and how it has an effect on like serotonin in the brain, and such like that, and that relates to how all creatures with a brainstem, how they all deal with each other, because your nervous system across different creatures on the planet, it's not really all that different. There's a fantastic portion. It's the first chapter of a book by Dr. Jordan Peterson that talks about your nervous system is essentially the exact same functionality and setup as a lobster's. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
And the point is not to call you a lobster, but to make you realize that we're not all that different from
Yes,
other creatures on this planet that are much 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 older than human beings are, and we can study how these things have evolved in those creatures, and it better lets us understand ourselves.
yeah.
You know.
People tend to, in times of in And after exposure to repeated trauma like that, they tend to do one of two things. They tend to try and give what they wish they had, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a good example of that is a lot of these, famous comedians over the years who've, um, they're just made everybody laugh their entire life, and then they end up committing suicide, right?
Yeah.
So why is it? It's because something is going on in there, and they're trying to replace that, by
Right.
sending all this good energy out into the world, and
Right.
it's not sustainable, right?
Yeah.
And the bully is the same way, right? There's something that they're trying to replace fear or whatever psychological thing they're going through with this aggression, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's not sustainable, right? I mean, you can get away with a certain amount of bullying in grade school. You get in a lot of trouble and you get suspended and expelled and all that kind of stuff. But if you're in your 20s and you're still doing that, the stakes end up much higher, right? You're going
Right.
to jail, you're getting shot, I mean, it just like it doesn't last. So
No, you're right. I mean, in most cases, it doesn't. We're at a real interesting point in our political process in the country now, and I'm not going to lean right or left in this conversation, but there are definitely plenty of people. I'm not giving my own opinion here. There are plenty of people who have very much said that the current president of the United States is a bully. Um, so there's I can say in my own experience in life, I have certainly been in places where I felt like there was workplace bullying going on, that managers sometimes are bullying of lower employees. I could definitely tell you that I had a general manager at a gym who was a bully, and he classic bully, because he would throw his weight around to anybody who he knew he could bully, and then when he couldn't, he very much became a coward.
yeah,
Very interesting. But when you're the big dog in a general manager in a gym, you're the general manager in the gym. What's anybody gonna say? We had plenty of times where we had to lock eyes with each other, and he didn't have his shit together enough to challenge me. But at the same time, there's not much I could do because he was the general manager, and the corporate people above him were not any better. So he was a yes
yeah,
man to them. So he was kind of like, when it comes to bullying, there's usually hierarchy there too. In bullying, there's usually um, a flock of bullies, and so what you end up with is you end up with the lead bully, and you end up with all his little toadies, right? That's a very, very, very common thing.
yeah. I think you know in terms of what is someone coming into your school looking for, and uh, one of the first questions people generally ask is, what brought you in? Why are you here? Are you interested in the martial arts? How'd you hear about us? You're collecting all this information. And, at that time, you also should be trying to feel out like, who is this person in front of me a little bit, right? Not even just because you want to understand their motivation and make sure you can point out how your program aligns with what they're here for, right? And what do you have to offer them? You know what they want. You can tell them what you have that meets their needs,
Or
um,
doesn't.
or doesn't, right? Yeah, I mean, there are some students you don't want, right? I mean, and the obvious one is, like, well, I don't know. I won't say obvious. An example is, like what is your school about? A guy comes in and says, oh yeah, I want to start my cage fighting career. Teach me some taekwondo or Hapkido or whatever system you're. I mean, that's a moment where you can say, our program really you can teach you martial arts skills, but we're not a cage fighting program. Like we're not going to be in here beating on each other all night. Maybe we don't meet your needs, right?
We don't coach for that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
we're really not the right person. We'd be doing you a disservice, honestly.
Yeah, and you get other answers too, right? Like I can remember one time we had a student come in who was asking all these questions, doing class, and really like the opposite of the trial class student. You know, most trial class students are like a little timid, you know, like because they just don't know what's going on. They're trying to figure out how they fit in. What do I do? If I do something to somebody else, am I going to hurt them? If they do something to me, is it going to hurt me? You know, there's typically like a period of trepidation there for the first couple of trial classes, right? And this one
Yeah.
woman comes in and she's like on it. She's like, "How hard are you willing to hit me?" You know, and I'm like, you know, it's like, well, I mean, I just met you, so you know, maybe there's some limits here. But you know, you start to like after a little while, she's like, "I really want to do it for real. I really want to know, you know, what it's like and all this stuff." And you know, by the end of that class, I'm like asking this woman, like, do you feel like you need to leave here and use this stuff tonight to protect yourself? Like, is there something going on with you that
Right.
is like, I
Immediate,
don't know if I can
yeah,
help you, but I
imminent
feel
danger.
like there's something going on here, you know? And, you know, their answer was that, you know, they had a you know, unpleasant person in their life and they didn't feel like they were in immediate danger, but they knew the time was coming. Right. And I, you know, that's when I
Yes.
kind of had to say, like, all right, well,
Yes.
listen, I mean, like, I could teach you things um, that could help you in that situation, but you know, there's a learning curve, right? And
Right.
if you're this far down your situation now, you need to be thinking about other options. You know, you need to be thinking about getting out of town,
Yeah.
finding a shelter, uh, calling the police. You know, whatever else there's going to be, because like, um, you know, that's just the way the situation is right now. It's just the reality of the timing and how this progresses, you know. I mean, you could teach someone in one class something they can go out on the street and use to defend themselves. And there are stories out there if you go look for them. Like, yeah, I did my trial class and they showed me this one thing. And 2 days later, some guy started swinging at me at the mall or whatever. And I just
And I did it.
did it and it worked, you know. So certainly,
That that statement right there, if you don't mind me interjecting, Brian, what you just said right there is extremely important to throw a caveat in there, okay? Because um, it's very often not a function of the technical nature of martial arts that makes it difficult to um, to execute from day one. Very often, it's the level of the person's temerity. How timid are you? And when you walk into the martial arts school, are you like a rabbit? You're afraid of everything around you. Where are you on the food chain? Because that has a huge impact on how willing you are to pick up something and then immediately be willing to do it to another human being. So a lot of times when you teach a student, even though they've learned the skill, they're not willing to execute it yet because they're still dealing a lot with victimhood and things like that. Um, and I'm going to take a moment to kind of detail what I would consider a success story of a student of mine who's. I'm going to leave things extremely vague because if that student happens to listen to this podcast, I don't want them to be embarrassed or feel called out. So I'm going to be extremely vague so the person's unidentifiable. But this individual came to my class with a lot of trauma, a history from a bad relationship with abuse and things like that. And this person's tried really hard to get their feet under them and empower themselves through their training. And it is a definite struggle and a definite challenge for them. The fact that they keep coming to class is a testament to the fact that they really want to be empowered enough to take care of themselves. Well, this person's abuser came back into their life at one point in time, completely unannounced, and gave a surprise attacked my student. Um, and the student had definite moment of inability to and of course, as you know, self-defense happens in microseconds, right?
mhm.
And I wasn't there, so I'm only going off of the story I was told. And by understanding how this story goes, you're going to hear me explain it in lengthy detail here, but you got to understand it all happened like this because time uh, is much faster than that. Time is much, much faster than an actual description of a fight. But the student is getting pummeled and pummeled and pummeled by former abuser, and student is having trouble coming up with what to do, which that's normal. That's 100% normal under that level of a stressful situation. It's 100% normal. And student remembers they are carrying their pocket knife on them. By the way, martial arts is not the only way to defend yourself, and both Brian and myself are advocates for concealed weapon. We very much believe in the validity of a knife, a stick, a gun, and those things under the proper execution of the law based on where you are.
You need the legality, and you need the skill and training to use them effectively.
Right. So make sure you're on the right side of the law. We're not telling you to go break the law. I have a certified carry conceal permit, so I know the laws in my area. Although I generally don't carry. More than anything, I wanted to take the class so I could learn the law, and I could help apply that with my students. Still, though, student was carrying a knife on them for self-defense, reached and grabbed their knife and started going to work on the assailant from behind, and definitely caught them several times. So that's a success right there. Called the police afterwards, and I'm not really sure what has happened since that altercation, but that's definitely what I would consider to be a success, because they were able to walk away from the situation. Were they hurt? Yeah, they were. They were injured. But in terms of injury, I would say fairly mild level injuries, because we're talking bruising, nothing broken, no hospitalization. So minor injuries, and I think they probably got the lion's share of that fight, even though they were attacked and unprepared. I think that qualifies as a victory, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah, certainly, survival is the name of the game, right? That's the whole thing. You give yourself a chance to survive. And I think, as you we're just getting back to, bringing students into your program, right? And probing into what, why are they here? Or what are they interested in? Like, it's important to go down that road. I mean, you're a commercial school, you need students to survive. But at the same time, like you want to make sure you're teaching the right people, the right things. You could probe into that. Some people you like use your example. There is some version of you walking into a martial arts studio somewhere right now with the same story. Why are you here? Oh, well, I get beat up a lot at school, and I learn how to defend myself. And or getting a lot of fights, and I want to learn to defend. You can start to probe, like, okay, tell me about your situation. What kind of things are happening? And you don't have to get into people's personal business, but you can get an idea of what are they going to do with the information that you give them, right?
Right.
Because I can remember, just from my junior high, there were these two kids. They were, I don't know, you're two older than me, I can't remember, but they were in this massive contest to figure out who was the toughest kid in the school. I mean, they were fighting each other all the time. Like, the notice that there was going to be a fight underneath the tree at the library, at the park. I mean, they had all the trees in town, trying to fight each other and figure out who was the toughest. At some point in time, it's not inconceivable that like one of those guys is going to be like, all right, well, I lost the last one of these, so I'm going to go get some martial arts lessons. And
Inconceivable.
so that's the guy who's coming in saying, I get in a lot of fights, and I'm tired of getting beat up. It's like, well, who's fighting and why? And you start to probe in, and it's like, you could start to get an idea, and you can make a judgment call, is my point.
Yeah.
Just by scratching the surface a little bit.
Yeah. Now, it's one thing for them to be a bully in the classroom versus a bully outside of the classroom, because the problem with that is it's difficult to spot them being a bully outside of the classroom. Inside the classroom, you have control of the environment, so you're gonna become aware at some point in time, depending upon how slick they are. It'll be right away, or it might be a while because they figure out when they should push buttons and when they shouldn't.
Yeah.
So, under the assumption that they're a bully outside of the classroom, until you're informed by somebody, there's very little you might do because you just might be completely unaware. Maybe
Yeah.
a parent comes and says, it's I'm really glad he's been learning confidence, but now he's starting fights at school, and you're like, oh, okay,
Yeah, there's a much better feedback loop with children that way because a
yes,
parent will eventually, or even minors, right? If you don't want to call them children, but a parent will eventually come in and say, "Hey, we're done here because he's starting fights at school," right?
yeah,
Or that kind of thing. I mean, you get some feedback loop that. With adults, it's even more difficult than that.
yeah,
Because you may never hear. Now, the one thing I will say though is that there can be a tendency to brag a little bit, right? Like, occasionally, like your students, even when they're not being bullies, will occasionally say, like, I had a martial arts moment outside of the classroom, you know? And I always encourage people to bring that up, right? Just say,
yeah.
what is it? How do what, and it could be something simple, an awareness thing, or, I was, I slipped in the lunchroom and did a perfect side fall or, whatever it was, right? I mean, there's always good moments to learn from that. And occasionally you'll get one of those stories. It's like, yeah, I was at a bar and there was this, the guy from the rival football team was mouthing off, and boy, did I let him have it.
Right.
And it's like, okay, well,
Is there
you
more
know,
to this
there's
story,
more to that
or is
story
that
here.
it?
Yeah.
Because
So you can kind of, if you can, you can't know everything. You're not omnipresent and you're not omnipotent either, right? So you won't know everything, but you can get a good pulse for what's going on just by paying attention and engaging your students, on a personal level.
yeah, it's hard not to have a level of pride after an engagement like that because even if you train in a martial art and you don't want to hurt people, you have no intentions of hurting people. If you're on a weekly basis doing this stuff and suddenly in your life you actually use it and it works, it's like validation. It's
Right.
very much validation, especially because the truth is, very often we get told by people, lay people, oh, well, that stuff doesn't work. Okay, if you say so. We get told that all the time. Well, that karate stuff doesn't actually work. Which, how do you know if you've never learned it or never fought somebody who actually knows how to do it?
That's right. We could talk about, we could do that on another show. Why do people think karate doesn't work or martial arts in general doesn't work? Right.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a real good one. Um, so yeah, I mean, there's definitely that. Hey, oh my goodness, I really did it, which
Yeah.
is empowering. I get it.
No, there's a certain, you know, what I guess there's always a certain uncertainty, if that makes any sense. You know, that's in the back of your mind. Will this work if I have to use it? Right. I mean, you're hopefully you're making you know, you're making as realistic of scenarios as you can in your classroom, right? So that people have some idea that yeah, I can do this in a less controlled environment than the normal class, but you still never know. And I mean that's pervasive. That's pervasive among any um, skilled profession out there,
well,
right?
well, okay. In the in the Apollo rocket program, they did all kinds of insane math and engineering, uh, and they prayed it would work. They took a shot that it would work.
Oh
Did
yeah,
they know it was going to work? No.
had a pretty good idea,
They
but
had a pretty good
they didn't know
idea.
with certainty, right?
They had a pretty good idea, that's for sure. But were they also taking a gamble? Absolutely. 100% taking a gamble. But of course, the more you do something, the less of a gamble it becomes. Although there is still always going to be some level of risk.
Absolutely.
Challenger. Um,
The military is another way, right? I mean, you just think about like, those guys enlist and get all this training to go, fight war and you know what the outcome of fighting a war is, right? I mean, or can
Right.
be anyway. It's the most violent profession that there is, right? And what's the first thing that they want to do when they're out of training? They want to go get in a fight.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
especially the more advanced tier guys. They just like they got all the training, all the best gear, and the first thing they want to do is prove that they can do it,
Hmm.
right? So,
Right. Spoiling
uh,
for a fight. You've been
yeah,
wound tight and you've been trained for it, and you wanna test it.
martial arts students
That's
can definitely be the same way.
yeah.
Um, so, I think the other way that you be a bully, right? It was the bully in the classroom. Um, and this is easier to deal with, I think, than the bully outside of the classroom because you can see it every time they're there, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a couple of reasons or ways I think that people act like a bully in class. And I would say one of those I think is just it's still born from that same insecurity, right? It's like I don't want this technique to be able to work on me, right? Or I want to make sure I'm the best so I can't get taken down. So I'm going to make sure that I, do whatever it is that I can do so that none of my partners can do anything on me, right? That way I'm becoming what I want to be,
Right.
right?
Right.
Um, I'm proving to myself that I'm learning the things I want to learn. And another way to put that in less words is just to say that they are just being a bad student, right? They are not. We talked about this, and I think was the last episode. Your goal in the classroom is to be a good student, right? To learn how to learn martial arts, and the outcome of that will be that you will be a good martial artist at the end of further down the line of your training. But it's not obvious how to do that, right? So I think that's one thing that you can teach people, like what is the value of having this technique done to you? What is the value of that partner relationship especially in combative arts where you need a partner to practice, right? um,
The value of giving.
right, exactly, the value of giving. And it's not just his turn, my turn. It's when he's doing it to me, I'm also learning, right? I'm learning what this
Right.
technique should feel like to receive. I'm learning how to fall safely.
Right.
I'm learning how to sense my own balance and take care of my own body in a different way. I mean, it's all good stuff. You just need to teach people that, right?
Yeah. Well, and let's be real matter of fact here. A lot of practitioners of the martial arts are young men. Um, if you were just to cut a swath across the statistics, it's more likely if you train in the martial arts, you're male than female. Although that statistic has changed a lot, that demographics changed a lot over the years, which is, I think, really cool because I'd love to see ladies in the martial arts. Um, and it's very, very common that you're going to be younger than you are older. There's a predominant uh, uh, young male population, or at least, at some point in time, you were a young male, not quite so young anymore, but I was that kid. And what you end up with is you end up with a hot shot. You get somebody who goes all the way up through their color belt training and they tie on that black belt and suddenly they're a hot shot.
Mm-hmm.
And they haven't connected the lesson yet that there's still a lot more to learn. They think they're the king of the hill. That's extremely common in a teenage boy or young 20s boy black belt, first degree black belt. And they kind of need some continuing maturity to have that kind of grow out of them.
Yes, they need,
Um,
they need a higher rank to put them on the mat.
that's actually very often how it happens, honestly, which we could argue whether or not that is constructive or destructive. And I've used that method. I've actually done that, but usually it's in context of I'm seeing them hot rodding with a student and they're being kind of a bully in terms of their behaviors across multiple classes. So then I'll square off with them just to remind them. I don't want to abuse them, but I might just let the air out of their tires a little bit to remind them where they really are. and what it is they're supposed to really be doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's different tactics you can use to deal with that, even if you don't, physically want to go, spar your student or do something like that. There's
Yeah.
always some way you can point out that they know a lot and they're, definitely, um, have achieved a high level of skill, but they don't know everything yet, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Um, I think there's another type of student that kind of comes across as a bully in class sometimes too, and that's the guy that is just so eager to learn or show what they know that they just can't stop, right? They become the
Yeah.
instructor, right? They're like, "Oh, yeah, do this." And they're like, "Oh, no, you could, yeah, you did, but, let me just show you and you could do this, you could do this, and you could do this, and if you twist this way, it's a little better." And like next thing you know, like the whole 10-minute segment of class is gone and the partner never even got to try the technique, right?
Yep. I showed
Um,
you 20 variations and we didn't do one of them more than once, and you're left going, I don't know what to do now. Yep.
yeah, exactly, right.
Absolutely.
And then, especially if you're teaching a bigger classroom full of students as an instructor, it can kind of be sometimes not obvious that that's going on right away. I mean, you're trying to get around and see all your students every class, right? But
Yeah.
yeah,
Very often, as the instructor nowadays, after all these years of teaching, very often I apply the less is more approach. So when I hear somebody just going on and on and on and on and on, and let's call a spade, I can talk.
hmm
I very much can talk. Uh, I could dominate this channel if I really wanted to. But I absolutely respect and value Brian's opinion, so I force myself to shut up, so that I can listen because I want to hear from my own perspective what Brian has to say. It matters to me. So I actively make it a point to pull myself back so I can hear him. But that having been said, when I'm teaching nowadays, very often I say less when students are practicing because I really want to prioritize what's the most important thing I can
yeah,
show them right now, as opposed to teaching them 12 different things and they won't really be able to internalize all of that. I just try to get one across that really, really, really is critical, and then later I can go to the next one on that list.
yeah. I think I always tell students, like that I want to relieve them of the burden of having to teach, right? Like I am the teacher. I am here to do that so that you don't have to. And they take it a little bit strangely sometimes because again, it's like that. You're proud of yourself, right? You're learning something, and you could do something now that you couldn't do a month ago or whatever. And now the next student's coming along, and you want to show like, hey, look, I know how to do this. I can show it, and you can at your level, but you're still not perfect. I mean, even you're never perfect, right? Even me, like I go to seminars and I always learn something I could do different and make it just a little bit better. Um, so certainly if it's true for me, it's true for someone who's a green belt, right?
Right.
And again, like we talked about that practice being such a give and take, like you when you're attacking, you're taking reps on falls. You're taking reps on, how do I get a good attack in? How do I give them some energy? How do I try and maintain my balance? But then when I can't, because they've done the technique properly, how do I fall without hurting myself? Like that's important practice for you too, right? And if
It
you're
is.
doing the teaching while you're, doing the attacking, then you're cutting off half your training time, right? So I always try and sell it to him that way. Like if it's not working, and I'm on the other end of the classroom and I don't notice it, raise your hand, call me over, whatever, let me know, but don't teach, right? That way you can prevent your even your well-intentioned students from just kind of bogarting all of the training time away from your younger students.
Well put. In fact, that might be something I need to implement more. That's really good. Really good.
Yeah, and I would say there's another type of student too, and you know, you get that is the I'll use the very stereotypical example. The former football player, right? The guy who was bred to be tough, and they just, have that in their brain, right? Like, I will just fight until I'm exhausted or I can't fight no more. And, sometimes they're really capable of it too, particularly if they actually were a former football player, because they're probably still
Pretty tough.
relatively good shape, or at least they have the mental toughness, right? Because they got,
Been
slammed
hit.
into 100 times a week, practicing football, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yet again, that point that you've brought up not only tonight but in previous episodes, that it's important to learn how to take the hit and take the fall.
Mhm.
It's paramount that you learn how to do that. We don't want you to end up in that position in the street. We don't want you to take the hit. We don't want you to take the fall. But you better know how to do it in case it does happen. Because from a statistical standpoint, if you end up in a fight, you probably will.
Yeah, right. Uh, you can't fight if you knocked yourself out on the sidewalk because you didn't know how to fall down. Right.
Yeah.
It would be a terrible way to go out. You took yourself out of the fight at the very beginning, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
And regardless of what movies show you, we got to always keep in mind that media doesn't do real life combat justice. War movies are not what war is like. Martial arts movies are not what martial arts are like, okay? They're
mm,
all fantastical representations of something that actually is pretty ugly. And we just got to keep that in mind. If you actually watch people hit each other for real, regardless of whether it is with fists or sticks or knives or guns, it's over quick. Okay? It's always over quick. It doesn't go on for 5 minutes. It doesn't go on for 10 minutes. As you'll like this because we're both really big fans of Star Wars, Brian. I was watching a YouTuber's video last night, and it was a deconstruction of the Revenge of the Sith, Anakin versus Obi-Wan fight. And this guy's actually
oh yeah.
into HEMA, which if you don't know what HEMA is historical European martial arts, or historical reenactment of sword fighting with armor and things like that. Okay, and this gentleman is an expert in those things. And he's been training in them for a very long time, knows a ton about armor, knows a ton about swords, why they were made the way they are, how they functioned in different periods of history in different places. And did a deconstruction of, he's got several out there for Star Wars, and I watched his Anakin versus Obi-Wan Revenge of the Sith one last night, and it was beautiful. It's about a 10-minute fight in the movie, and his deconstruction of it takes about an hour. He goes that blow by blow, frame by frame, and then explains why things are the way they are, what's good, what's bad, and that's really cool, But you'll enjoy this just because we're both martial artists. He said most of the choreography in that fight scene is actually really good. He said a lot of it is really, really, really good. A lot of it makes sense from classical sword fighting versus other movie style sword fights. Not all of it does. Some of it when it gets bad, it gets really bad. It gets very, very, very bad when it gets bad. But
Yeah, I could think of
but
a few moments probably.
yeah, but when it's not bad, he says it's actually overall fairly plausible, the kind of things that they choose to do in the fight, which is cool. Okay. But no sword fight lasts 10 minutes. Okay. And no martial arts fight, no self defense situation. I want to retract martial arts fight because, you can go watch an MMA bout that's going to be 3 rounds of 5 minutes each. And that's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
the same thing, right? They're fighting under rules. There's doctors present. There's a referee present.
Well,
They're
and
not,
even
they're,
even even at that, like at the end of the 5-minute round, they're some of the best athletes in the world, and they're gassed,
yeah,
right?
absolutely true. Very
Yeah.
true. I mean, they train for hours on end in order to be able to survive minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in a real fight, it can be over in seconds, and it can be, and then, sorry, not hit my mic, knockout, done. It can be just like that. And if it isn't just like that, that knockout hit usually isn't very far behind. It's not going to last very long. And there's plenty of YouTube videos you can watch to see that.
Yeah, absolutely true. That's bringing us full circle to the Cobra Kai thing, right? Strike first,
Mm-hmm.
strike hard, because that's usually what happens, right? Um, I do. There's one more point I want to go back and make before I, mentally lose thread here. But that we talked about that guy, who's tough, right? And wants to show that like it doesn't work on me or that they can do it on everybody. They can brute force it on everybody. There are techniques you can use to try and open their mind on that, right? I can remember, showing a technique like it was basically like what we would call Z lock in Hapkido, right? Where you're kind of like twisting your wrist. This one's going to be hard to describe for the people who aren't watching, but is if your palm was going to the outside of your forearm, right, and then your
Thumbs
elbow is bent, thumb down,
thumbs
right,
down, like the Emperor of Rome. Do that.
and essentially it puts flexion and rotational stress on the wrist. It's very powerful technique, and I'm showing this technique and I'm demonstrating this technique and people are doing it. You can see this guy on the side of the classroom, going like getting ready for it, right? And so when his partner grabs him, he's just like locked down, big strong forearms. He's just gonna lock his arm in place, and the other student, couldn't couldn't get it, right? So I'm walking over there. What's going on? I can't get it. And the guy's like, this technique doesn't work on me. It's like
Yeah, it
challenge
does.
accepted,
Yeah, it
Uh,
does. Let's test that
yeah.
theory.
So, I'm like, okay, well, let me see, and he does the same thing to me and he grabs on strong enough that I can't, move my hand. And it's like, all right, well, here's, you start to explain, you bring them along on the scenario. Now you're strong and you've seen this coming and you've locked this down, right? So in reality, what I would do is something else. And by the time I'm done with the word else, he's on the mat because I've done something else, right?
Right. And
Obviously,
they're
in a controlled fashion,
surprised
I'm not
as
trying to hurt
all
him,
get out.
and they're surprised. But 9 times out of 10, the light bulb goes off, right? Like, oh, okay. Then you stand it back up and you're like, now, if I didn't know anything else and I was just trying to do this, what I would do for real is I would slam my foot as hard as I can in your kneecap. So at that point, you will be unable or unwilling to keep all this stress in your arm,
Mm-hmm.
right? And once I did that, I could manipulate your wrist, But
Yep.
we try not to do that in the classroom because our partner doesn't generally like to have his kneecap smashed in 10 times in a row, right?
Right. Or
So
even once.
right. So what you're doing is you're explaining the process of being a partner to this person, right?
Right.
You give
Here's
them
how you be a good
right.
partner.
You're going to give me enough resistance that I know I'm doing something, right? But not so much that I have to break your kneecap to make it work, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The
And,
trick there,
and
there,
that's
there's another element that's really important to mention, though, is that sometimes that person that we're talking about is not that way on purpose. Sometimes it's not even I'm tough. Sometimes it's just I'm wired tight.
that can be true too. Yeah.
Neurologically tight, and I don't realize I'm actually making this difficult. That's a different situation
Yeah.
all on its own we could talk about.
Less of a bully, more of just a physical difference with your partner.
I
Uh,
consider that one when I look at students like that to be kind of a neurological condition that may or may not have something to do with their psychology as well.
sure, absolutely. Some people are also just physically like I have a guy in my class right now whose shoulders just don't do like hammerlock is not a thing on that guy. Like he is tapping out on hammerlock before his wrist is behind his hips, right? So
Yeah, rotator cuff, huh?
how he is,
Yeah,
Um, but then there's the other side of that situation too, right? The guy's like, I'm just gonna power through this technique to make sure it works,
yeah,
right? Because
right. Overboard.
Yeah, right. And in doing so, they're overpowering or potentially, risking injury to their partner. And that, that can also be coached out of people too, right? Like, all right, hang on now. You're big and you're strong, and that's a huge advantage, right? But you shouldn't have to be big and strong to do this. So if it's taking all your energy to do this technique, there's probably something we got to fix. Let's work on it. And over time, like, and repetition, just attention that way from the instructor, you can eliminate that type of bullying in the classroom because they'll have the vision now. It's not like, okay, my job is to resist this technique or to force my way through, overpower the guy so I can do this technique. It's my
Yeah.
job to read the situation and do what works, right?
Yeah.
And
Hang on a minute. Hang on. Are you telling me that overkill is in fact not the right amount of kill?
well, it's in my class. I like to talk about tools in the toolbox, and certainly, the overkill is in there.
But don't
But
hit a fly with a howitzer.
maybe not every time, right? Maybe that's
Right.
not the opening position. So
Very
other
good.
systems might have different opinions on that, but
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I mean, hopefully at the end of the day, I would say we're trying really hard to solve the problem of bullying and not exacerbate it. Whenever somebody asks me, like, "Is this gonna make my kid a bully?" My answer is no, no, it's not. And I believe that wholeheartedly because
yeah,
if they are a bully, it's already in their heart. And what I'm teaching them won't make them a bully. Now, it might make them more dangerous as a bully, and I can't argue with that statement. But hopefully, I've had the ability
yeah.
to mold and shape them before they're actually good enough to employ what they learn, because this stuff does take time.
No, true. I mean, I think these are the steps we're taking as martial artists and instructors and school owners and program directors, whatever we want to call ourselves, right? Like we're trying to bring in the right students. You're trying to bring in the students that match your, you know,
Vibe.
program, right?
Yeah.
Your the personality of your program, if you want to say it that way.
Yeah.
And then you're watching constantly for their behavior in the classroom, right? And any indications that you can get of their behavior out of the classroom, so
Yeah.
that you get it's a feedback loop on your training. How am I presenting the material? What are they learning? What are they doing with their knowledge? Right? That's all part of just you developing your voice as an instructor and your signature as a school owner.
Yep.
And where it goes wrong is when that isn't working, and you end up creating this bully, which you're ultimately trying to avoid.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Hopefully, we're solving the problem and not adding to it. Well, what are we going to talk about next time?
I think the topic for next time is, has martial arts gotten soft?
That sounds right. Should be an interesting discussion because, like most things, there's no easy answer.
That is correct. Yeah, and there will be no as many opinions as we have. People who are willing to give their opinion on the topic, right? So it could be a very interesting one. I think there's a lot of yeah, like you said, a lot of ways to look at that, and we'll try and cover a couple of those during next hour.
There's no
So thanks.
crying in baseball.
That's right. So thanks again, everyone who's watching and listening. We really appreciate it. Please do us a favor and like, subscribe, share, comment. We're always looking for your questions and comments too. If you have topics you'd like us to discuss in the future, hit us up, let us know. And with that, we're going to sign off, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.